Donald Trump taps Oklahoma Attorney General Scott Pruitt to lead EPA. Washington, President-elect Donald Trump on Wednesday chose Oklahoma Attorney General Scott Pruitt to lead the Environmental Protection Agency, according to a transition official, turning to a climate change skeptic and sharp critic of the agency to take its helm. As the chief legal officer of a major oil and natural gas-producing state, Mr. Pruitt, a Republican, has led legal fights against some of President Barack Obama's most significant environmental rules. And one of his major roles as EPA administrator would likely be to try to roll back those regulations. That prospect cheered some industry leaders, many of whom have been frustrated as the Obama administration unveiled far-reaching environmental rules as part of the president's goal of fighting climate change, while drawing objections from environmentalists concerned over Mr. Pruitt's questioning of climate change. Harold Hamm, a top energy advisor to Mr. Trump and an ally of Mr. Pruitt's, said Mr. Pruitt would take a different approach to the agency. He understands the regulatory stranglehold that the EPA has had on industry during the Obama administration, said Mr. Hamm, founder and CEO of Continental Resources, which is based in Oklahoma City. I believe that he will work to unleash prosperity in America through the proper use of regulations and adhering to the rule of law. Mr. Pruitt has touted his leadership role in fighting the EPA rule that cut power plant carbon emissions, called the Clean Power Plan, as well as an EPA measure that put more bodies of water under federal jurisdiction. Both rules have been temporarily blocked by federal courts as litigation proceeds. In choosing a legal official to head his EPA, Mr. Trump could be signaling that legal action will be central to carrying out his campaign promises to repeal a host of rules related to climate change and other environmental issues. We are very accustomed to the naysayers and the critics, senior Trump advisor Kellyanne Conway said when asked by reporters about criticism of Mr. Pruitt's selection. Attorney General Pruitt has great qualifications and a good record as AG of Oklahoma, and there were a number of qualified candidates for that particular position that the president-elect interviewed. We look forward to the confirmation hearings. The selection of Mr. Pruitt reflects a request by some on Mr. Trump's transition team that his cabinet, heavy on political allies and wealthy business leaders, should also include state officials and others not closely associated with the president-elect. According to two transition officials, Mr. Pruitt has been a close ally of the oil and natural gas industry, whose influence in Oklahoma rivals even its clout in Texas. He has pushed back against a group of Democratic attorneys general who are investigating ExxonMobil Corp's handling of climate change science in recent decades. Mr. Pruitt has also indicated he questions the scientific consensus that human activity is helping raise the Earth's temperature. Though he has been less outspoken about it than some other candidates Mr. Trump was considering to head the EPA. Scientists continue to disagree about the degree and extent of global warming and its connection to the actions of mankind. Mr. Pruitt said in an op-ed that he and Alabama Attorney General Luther Strange wrote in May for the Tulsa World, that debate should be encouraged in classrooms, public forums, and the halls of Congress. Groups representing U.S. farmers hope Mr. Pruitt will roll back Obama policies they view as burdensome, such as the rule putting more waterways and wetlands under federal protection. Farmers feared the rule, which Mr. Pruitt challenged as Oklahoma Attorney General, would give the EPA oversight over their ditches and ponds and restrict crop production and land maintenance. He should be suited to take on these kinds of abuses and overreaching from the agency, to put the agency back on track, said Ellen Steen, General Counsel at the American Farm Bureau Federation. Ms. Steen said the Farm Bureau, which has challenged the EPA water rule in court, hopes Mr. Pruitt will rescind the regulation. Energy groups welcomed the selection of Mr. Pruitt, noting his industry-friendly record as a politician from an oil and gas-producing state. We expect that he will consider all of the reliable available data before developing and implementing any new regulation impacting our industry, the International Association of Drilling Contractors said. But environmentalists were dismayed at the notion of placing someone at the head of the environmental agency who questions the scientific consensus on climate change. Americans want to transition to clean energy to protect our air, our water and our climate, said climate activist Tom Steyer. But rather than respecting the will of the people, Trump has chosen a nominee for Environmental Protection Agency administrator who has a record of putting corporate polluters' profits ahead of our health. Environmentalists urged the Senate to reject his nomination, although that would be an uphill climb as the chamber is controlled by Republicans. Sen. Charles Schumer, D.N.Y. The incoming Senate Democratic leader, said Mr. Pruitt would face tough questions during his confirmation. Attorney General Pruitt's reluctance to accept the facts or science on climate change couldn't make him any more out of touch with the American people and with reality. Mr. Schumer said, "Well, Mr. Trump can't generally repeal Mr. Obama's rules unilaterally on his first day in office. He and his new EPA administrator, with the help of a GOP-controlled Congress, have a handful of ways to curtail the agency's work. They can restrict EPA funding on particular issues, pass laws nullifying individual regulations, and opt not to defend rules that face court challenges, including the Clean Power Plan and the Water Rule. The fate of the Clean Power Plan is currently in the hands of a federal appeals court in Washington, which is expected to rule in the coming months, possibly before Inauguration Day on January 20th. Donald Trump's choice of generals for top posts raises concerns. Washington, President-elect Donald Trump on Wednesday turned to a third retired military officer to help him run the country when he takes office in January. A move that represents an unusual level of military influence in the executive branch. Mr. Trump gave the nod to retired Marine Gen. John Kelly to lead the Department of Homeland Security, according to people familiar with the decision. A nomination that comes after he already has asked retired Marine Gen. James Mattis to be his defense secretary and retired Army LT. Gen. Mike Flynn to be his national security advisor. In addition, Mr. Trump is considering retired senior officers for at least two other top jobs, retired Army Gen. David Petraeus, retired ADM. James Stavridis to lead the State Department, and ADM. Michael Rogers to become Director of National Intelligence. In so doing, Mr. Trump is plumbing the global expertise and experience that comes with a life in the U.S. military. But he has also aroused concerns that his reliance on retired officers to lead security agencies ignores an important constitutional tenet of civilian oversight of the government. I can't honestly recall an administration with as many flag officers in top roles, said Thomas Allen Schwartz, a history professor at Vanderbilt University. I think this is probably somewhat unprecedented. The effects of the multiple military appointments are hard to predict. The general's presence might help ensure that the White House will have a deep understanding of the Pentagon's operations from those who have spent time in combat. But it doesn't necessarily mean these retired officers will be more likely to push the White House into armed conflict. Mr. Schwartz noted that retired Gen. Colin Powell, who served as President George W. Bush's first Secretary of State, was one of the most cautious members of that White House's foreign policy team. Even though there may be a preference to make sure there are well-funded services and that soldiers are well taken care of, it doesn't mean there will be a propensity to use force, he said. Critics of Mr. Trump still believe the choices threaten the constitutional firewall between the civilian government and the military. This is not normal, said Stephen Miles, director of the anti-war Win Without War Coalition. As the saying goes, if all you have is hammers, everything looks like a nail. Jen Mattis, who is widely considered one of the best-read senior military officers, is known for recognizing the limits of warfare. Jen Kelly, too, is intimately familiar with the tragedy of war. His son, a Marine lieutenant, was killed stepping on a landmine in Afghanistan in 2010. In the modern world, the four-star general brings to the table a much broader experience than just military leadership, said Michael Chertoff, who was DHS Secretary under Mr. Bush. They deal with diplomacy, statecraft, and managing a civilian workforce. He also said that in his experience, senior military commanders are often very careful about the use of force. The combination of retired military officers could create a variety of ripples within the new administration. Jens Mattis and Kelly, as two lifelong Marines, may create their own unique dynamic, especially when combined with the presence of the current chairman of the Pentagon's Joint Chiefs of Staff, Joe Dunford, an active duty Marine. And Jens Mattis and Kelly, both retired four-stars, could eclipse the National Security Advisor, Jen Flynn, who retired as a three-star. The selection of these general officers doesn't necessarily provide a roadmap to how Mr. Trump envisions national security policy, which he has yet to detail. Just categorizing them as generals is a disservice to them, said G. Calvin McKenzie, a professor at Colby College who has studied presidential transitions. There are good generals, and there are bad generals. Striking to Mr. McKenzie is the sheer unfamiliarity that Mr. Trump, who has no government, military or public service experience, likely will have with his cabinet officials. One of the things that's unique to this administration is it's filled with people who are strangers to Donald Trump, he said. Mr. Trump hasn't discussed the reasoning behind his choices, and they may reflect his desire for results-oriented individuals who approach problems pragmatically, not necessarily ideologically, as experts say military officers tend to do. These nominations and appointments of former military leaders do make a break from the GOP establishment, the traditional think tankers and former government officials of previous Republican administrations, a break which the candidate promise, if elected, said Stephen Wayne, a professor of government at Georgetown University. It may also be Mr. Trump's reaction to the Obama presidency. The Obama White House is widely seen as being leery of the Pentagon's power and the agendas of its generals ever since the decision to surge troops into Afghanistan in 2009. That move came after Mr. Obama and his national security advisors felt boxed in after the plans were leaked. In contrast, Mr. Trump has embraced generals' advice, even after he dismissed them on the campaign trail, saying he knew more than they did about how to solve national security problems. Mr. McKenzie said the Bay of Pigs fiasco during John F. Kennedy's administration gave the then-president a wariness of military advisors, especially the highest-ranking among them. Kennedy learned to be very skeptical of the generals. He learned to keep them at arm's length, he said. I don't know if those lessons of history have trickled down